I'm not Dax. Dax is thousands of miles away, and I'm glad to be here. And so we've been in Matthew, and we're continuing in Matthew 14. Where we were last week is Matthew. He tells a story of two feasts. And so we have this tale of two feasts. And within these two feasts, the feast of Herod and the feast in the desolate place, we see two kingdoms. So Matthew's given us this glimpse of two feasts and two kingdoms that really are contrasting. So Herod's, it's a birthday feast. It's all about him. It's celebrating him. He's the focal point. It's one of sensuality, indulgence, awkward promises, brutality, beheading. And that's kind of the climax is someone has their head cut off. And that particular somebody happens to be John the Baptist. So John the Baptist gets silenced because he's been calling out Herodias and Herod for their adulterous relationship. He calls out for what's wrong in the name of truth, in the name of justice. But his cries of truth and justice are ended or quenched with his own blood. So what does Jesus do as a response to this? We remember Jesus is actually, he's the cousin of John the Baptist. So this is not just an important person in his ministry in terms of proclaiming and announcing him and partnering with him, but he just had his own cousin get killed. So when we read last week, we see Jesus, he goes and he responds and goes to a desolate place. As I've thought about it, he's most likely feeling some sense of grief because a close family member just got killed in an awful way. So Jesus goes to this desolate place. He's trying to get time alone, and his opportunity for time alone is cut short because these crowds come to him and press in on him. And instead of Jesus guarding himself, instead of him drawing lines in the sand and saying he's on one side and everybody else can deal with it for a minute, we really see this swelling of compassion. So the compassion swells in him to meet the needs of the people around him. He's healing the sick. He's caring for people in a time where he could really, apart from everything else he's done, could say, hey guys, I'm going to take some time for me. You guys figure it out for a little bit. And so the second feast is what we read about last week, which was the feeding of 5,000. It's a feast of compassion. It's a feast of heavenly provision. It's a feast where the unexpected happens. The King of heaven and of earth holds a very simple, very meager banquet for commoners in a desolate place where Herod has had this big, extravagant, grand feast. And so Matthew gives us this picture of two kingdoms, a kingdom of worldliness, a kingdom of pleasure seeking, of kind of hedonism, and a kingdom of God's Son, what it is to know him and be in his presence. And so this kingdom of Jesus, we've been seeing as a kingdom of healing. The hurting and the hungry are welcome and they have their needs met because where Jesus is, he provides. Matthew's telling us the story in Jesus in a way where we can see a continuation of what God has done in Israel. So we can see how he's interacted with his people, how God has cared for Israel through Moses in the wilderness. And we can see this as like a parallel event as God used Moses to feed Israel, this manna and the quail throughout their time in the wilderness. Jesus is here in a desolate place where there's not much going on and no resources, and he provides from God to the people. And so they have these full baskets, everyone eats and is satisfied. And so picking up right after this, we have this account which we kind of know. It's like if you had a grandma that had an old painting of Jesus in her house doing something, it's like one of these moments. There was a sweet old couple in Chattanooga, where we live, when Red and I were first married, and Bob and Pat had a painting of this, of Jesus walking on the water. And, it's always white Jesus. It's never like Middle Eastern Jesus or Palestinian type Jesus. It's the very fair-skinned white Jesus walking on the water. And so a lot of that image of who Jesus is and what happens, kind of we have in our heads already, because it's a familiar story. So I'm going to read through the fullness of the passage, and then we'll kind of come back to it and go through it in parts. So you're welcome to turn there if you have it with you. You're welcome to follow on the screen. So my habit and tie is to the ESV. So I know Dax uses different translations, but I'll be reading from the ESV this morning. So this is from Matthew 14, starting at verse 22. Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the fourth watch of the night he came to them, walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost!" And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me!" Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." So grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And so what we have here in this story of Jesus and what's recorded for us is just as real and vital for us today as it was for the disciples. And as we move through this passage today, I'm confident God's Spirit is already showing you much of who Jesus is and the things that he's done just in the reading of his word. But I wanted to draw our attention to Jesus and his plan of action. So Jesus, he has given a lot of direction ever since he's first started in this. Jesus directs the disciples. He directs the crowds. He directs even himself. He has a purpose and a plan. So he's reclaimed. This is like his second effort to get time by himself.
That annoys me.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks, Todd. This is round 2 of Jesus trying to get alone time. He has sent everybody away after having time with him, and he is with his Father. It's it's before evening when he sends everybody away, and Jesus goes up on the mountainside, and he's there spending time just up at night alone. He's had a loss of his cousin. He's had a loss of partnership in his work. He's had a loss where he really seems to be impacted by it and wants this time. He's been neglecting sleep. He's been neglecting time with others, and he wants time with his Father. And so there's something to be seen in that. But Matthew The way that he tells this is he uses a repeat word, and whenever he uses a repeat word, it gets our attention. And so he uses this expression of immediacy. So he says immediately, immediately, immediately. And so we have in verse 22, immediately he dismisses the disciples. So he sends them across the sea by themselves. Immediately he has the crowds who are dismissed to go back to their homes, the places where they've been, because they've left and have wandered after Jesus in this place where there's no village, there's nothing nearby. It's it's kind of a awkward thing. Like, they've had time together and it's time for them to go. He excuses himself to go pray on the mountain. This is a time where he has really set himself apart for that. So the second push of immediacy is he immediately responds to the disciples. In the time where he shows up beside them and he can tell that they are freaked out of their minds, he doesn't leave them in a weird, distorted experience of who he is and surprise Jesus. Like, Jesus is a big time surprise to them to see him right there, and he immediately responds to their fear. They're disoriented. He doesn't leave them there. The third expression of immediacy comes as him and Peter have had time and they've been on the water together, and Peter's dropping below the surface. Jesus jumps right in. He immediately responds to what's happening with Peter. And so Jesus is very clear about what he wants to accomplish. He's action-taking in this passage. And I wanted to get us a sense of kind of where they are as all these things are happening. The setting of Matthew takes place in, the Sea of Galilee. So that's how it's named. A couple other names often get thrown out. So one of the cities on the outside is the Gennesaret, so it's sometimes called Lake Gennesaret. One of the ports is Tiberias, and so it's sometimes called Sea of Tiberias. So this is like the same thing that we do with, we're going down the boulevard, or, we're on 40, or, we have different names for the same things. It's the same thing if you're on 441 or Pine, or, you get it. It's a multi... Nobody's misnaming anything. It's just you have interchangeable names for this place. And so that's where they are. Typically, the way that the Sea of Galilee or Lake of Gennesaret's talked about is kind of a two sides. So we hear this crossing over the Sea of Galilee, and there's this idea of a more Jewish side and a more Gentile side, and going back and forth, kind of going from the one to the other. And so Jesus is more than likely, he's been on the eastern side, where he is on the Sea of Galilee. He's been on this eastern side, and I know I have like the map over there, but you can kind of see up at the top right, it's Bethsaida. More than likely, that's where this time of loaves and fishes, the feeding of the 5,000, took place. And then the story, as it picks up towards the end of Matthew 14, very last verses, and at the beginning of 15, he's over in the area of the Gennesaret. So kind of that top swooping arrow in reverse direction. So this just shows a lot of different things, but we can see he's been on that east side, and they're going to be headed over. Now, as a body of water, it's a little bit more than a big lake. It's not really what we would consider to be a sea. This crossing started after their meal, before evening has come. The crossing would have been a distance of maybe 4 to 5 miles, depending on where you go. You could say, maybe it's shorter, maybe it's not. But this may be 4 to 5 miles, and would take about 2 hours to get across for decent conditions. And so we have this idea, here's white Jesus, and thank you, white Jesus. And so we can kind of think of Jesus up on this mountainside, which I liked this kind of topographical view because it gives us an idea of how Jesus would have ascended to a place to be by himself. So up in that Bethsaida region. and um, and he would have been sending his disciples over towards kind of west of Capernaum. The Gennesaret region is nearby, a little bit west of where it says Mount Beatitudes. And so Jesus is going to be up on this mountainside, and he has a vantage point where he can actually see what's happening on the lake. He can actually see what happens on this Sea of Galilee. It's said that it's the fourth watch of the night. And so this gives us a time window of between 3 and 6 in the morning. So 3 a.m., 6 a.m. Jesus has been praying up there while they've been on the water. We don't get any details about what he says in his prayer. Sometimes we get those things later, but we don't hear what's on his heart and what all he is working through. But we know he's up through the night intensely with God, with his Father. And so his disciples, they're there and they're struggling. They're struggling to make their way across. They've been fighting with the waves. They've been fighting with the wind. And I get a sense that there's almost like a parallel going on between what's happening with the disciples and what's happening with Jesus, is that he's wrestling with prayer. And while he's wrestling with prayer, they're wrestling with the wind and the waves. And whether or not, that's actually happening or not, I don't know. But I kind of felt that sense of that may be what's going on. And so he's moving through his ministry. They're stuck halfway across the Sea of Galilee. The waves are beating them down. And Jesus is the one who told them to go and do this. So if we're going to kind of put ourselves in their heads, think about what might be going on in their minds, we might think, why did Jesus send us out here by ourselves? We know what it is to cross with him. We remember that time when we started to get swamped and we were bailing water and we were out on the lake with him and he was asleep and we woke him up and he silenced the wind and the waves, and that was good. That worked out because Jesus was there with us in the boat. But now he is not with us in the boat. He sent us across this lake and it's just us. Why did he do that? Did he forget about us? It's been ballpark 9 hours that they've been trying to do this 2-hour journey, and they're only halfway through. They're probably thinking, when is this going to end? Are we going to get across by daybreak? Are we going to be stuck on this lake forever? Could we just turn back and go back to where we came from? Certainly they're thinking if he was with us, things would be better. Okay, so this is the second big water event in Matthew's story. The first one already kind of that parallel of what happens with Jonah's account on the water. So that was Matthew 8. And we get this detail about Jesus being very aware of what's going on with him, because Mark tells us that Jesus' vantage point, he says, Mark 6:48, he saw that they were making headway painfully. And so Jesus knows that their crossing effort is not going well. When we read through the passage, it almost reads like he's just going to start his journey across on his own, just making his way, cutting across, and he's going to stroll right past them. And so walking is going to be easier than their rowing. And I don't want it to be lost that Jesus is doing something that is miraculous. He's doing something that shows his authority. He's doing something that shows his God nature, that he has a relationship with this world where all creation is under his authority. All creation is under his power, his strength, his means. Like he can do as he wants, where he wants. And so he's strolling by. The thing that they're fighting against is no obstacle for him. Jesus shows up, and they're in a struggle, and they're in a place of panic. So they've been fighting for some time, and all of a sudden this mysterious figure comes up on them. Remember, it's waves and wind, and conditions are rough. And so it's not that they just immediately say, oh yeah, of course that's Jesus, because it doesn't fit. When you see something and it doesn't match your expectations, and it's disorienting and confusing, and that's this moment. They've been in a place of chaos, and chaos is often the thing when we talk about the way that the Bible speaks of the sea is intensity, a loss of personal power, a loss of personal control, to be at the mercy. So people are at the mercy of the wind. People are at the mercy of the waves. This is not equal playing ground. It's not your... The deck is stacked against them. They're scared. And we see this in verse 26. It says that when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." They cried out in fear. They're likely, because of their fatigue and the confusion of this whole thing, they see something and they don't know what to make of it. Maybe this is the end. Maybe they think this ocean spirit is going to end them. And so here in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, maybe the end is here for them. And we see Jesus' response. And Jesus' response to hearing them call out, "It's a ghost." He's known these guys for a while. They should be able to figure out that it's him, and to trust that he sent them somewhere and he's not going to bail on them. And so Jesus, he's pretty gentle with them, with their confusion. His response: immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it's I. Do not be afraid." And I want to take what he said and kind of break it down a little bit more. We have this expression, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And a lot of times what you'll see in Hebrew texts and in the way that ideas are organized is there's like a sandwich effect. Like the fancy name for it's chiasm, but it's something starting at the beginning. You have the emphasis or the focus in the middle, and then kind of coming back to that idea at the end again. And so Jesus begins with words of comfort. Take heart. So he's aware they're distressed. We could say they're seen and heard and known. He knows their issue. He's not saying, "Suck it up, guys. You're fine. Quit none of that." He's not putting them down. He has lots of options in what he could say. Okay, but he speaks gentle. He gives words of comfort at the end. Do not be afraid. And in the middle of these two remarks, his gentle words of care, his gentle words of assurance, he puts himself in the middle of this. He uses this expression, "It's I." It is I. And the "it is I" is more than, "Hey, it's me, Jesus." Like sometimes that would be great just to say, "Hey, it's me, Jesus, and I'm here with you." But the expression that he uses is actually a much bigger expression. The expression of his identity is a historical expression. It's one that reaches all the way back to God calling Moses before him at the bush that's burning but not being consumed. This time where Moses is before God, and he's hearing about all these things that he's being asked to do and where he's told to go, and that he's going to represent him before Pharaoh, and he's terrified. And Moses finally breaks down and he says, "Who am I going to say is the one who's sending me?" And God replies to Moses in the Hebrew, which I won't read. That's that top line is the Hebrew expression. And then the Greek expression of this same phrase is what's written below there for us of ego me, which is the I am. That Jesus would speak to his disciples that he is. This is me. That when they're hearing him speak to them, that they're realizing that the God who appeared to Moses, the God who carried them through the Red Sea, the God who was their provision in all sorts of difficult circumstances, and he says, take heart, it's me. Do not be afraid. He's reminding and tying himself to the historicity of God caring for his people, shepherding his people, watching over his people, that no one's going to be lost. And so we have Jesus is with them. Jesus is with them in this place of chaos, and he's not surprised. He's with them in this place of chaos, and it's actually where he's put them. He's put them in a place of chaos to go together as believers to this place where God's called them to do and encounter hard things. And this kind of doesn't sound great. God calls us into hard things. He puts us into chaotic circumstances. It doesn't sound like an easy story. It doesn't sound like a happy story. It's not very comforting to know that God actually put them in this hard place where they are, and that it's not a mistake. We get accustomed to thinking if things are going smoothly, things are going according to plan. If things are without interruption, then they're going according to plan. If things are without fear, then that sounds like it's according to... But here we have fear, terror, straining without success, tremendous work, sleeplessness, fatigue, this very intense event, and they're surprised. And this is very, very real for us because, none of us are going to go cross the Sea of Galilee at any point, but at least, that would be kind of ridiculous, but we regularly experience these, where is God right now? Why am I in this thing? What is happening in life? And we're often surprised when Jesus simply just shows up and the chaos is still there. The want that I often would rather have more practically is like, okay, I was doing fine. Now just take care of the chaos and let me keep making my choices of life. It would feel great to row across a sea under my own strength. It would feel really empowering, like really confidence building. But that's actually not what Jesus is offering. Where I want the chaos to be gone, Jesus is actually showing that him being in it with me, or him being in it with us, is what he has to offer. When I'm faced with stressors in my own mind or difficult situations, that would mean, I would prefer, give me like a low engagement of Jesus, and then I want to feel empowered to deal with these things. I think it's pretty natural to want to feel like you have the strength in yourself, you have the power in yourself, you have the means in yourself to move through. But Jesus is bringing us into these very difficult, very unclear, confusion-filled situations. And his disciples can't even tell that it's him when he shows up. And I think it's true for us, is that when Jesus is showing up, we're often not even sure that that's him. And the reason I think we have this story in this account of what's going on is we need to hear and see who God is. We need to see who God is, who he has been, and that he's always with us, even in this place of strangeness. That we haven't gone out of his sight, even when it's pitch black. We haven't gone out of his sight, even when there's chaos. Wind and waves are crashing around us, and we've got enough figurative stuff in our lives and in the lives of our friends and our families and our communities to know what that is. That his disciples are right there where he wants them, and even when they don't realize that it's him. We have Peter's response here in verse 28. Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." Peter's reaction to Jesus is very Peter. It's very consistent with who he is. It's unclear what the tone of his statement is about, but Peter is regularly thought, speak, and then think about what you say. And so that's kind of what's happening too. I don't know that, it's almost like he's putting words in Jesus's mouth of, hey, it's not enough that Jesus just showed up, but hey, let me get out on the water with you. That's a bold ask. That's a bold thing to say. Jesus is doing something supernatural, and maybe I should fact check this by getting on the water with Jesus. It's kind of absurd to put yourself, he's interjected himself in this tremendous way. So he's bold and he's impulsive and kind of glorious. It's kind of fantastic that that's what he's going for, of not saying, Jesus, get in the boat with us, but tell me to come out to you and I'll come if it's you. And so the response that we have is we see Jesus, he replies, and they come together. Verse 29, he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. Peter is flying high. This is one of the best Peter scenarios that we have in terms of he did something bold. It's going really well. He's doing a miracle. He's like, Jesus is inviting him into his miracle. The other 11 are there in the boat, and it's Peter and Jesus showtime. And that would just be amazing. It would be overwhelming because he sees that it's really Jesus. He believes that he's called him into this thing with him, and he has a tremendous display of faith to be able to take this on. It's a knowing. He is knowing Jesus, and in his knowing Jesus, he has this freedom to step out in tremendous faith. The thing that lets us know that this really is a miracle and not just a silly location trick is there's no sandbar. When we read through the miracle accounts and these things that Jesus does of tremendous power over nature, it can be tempting to want to try and find a simple solution that makes it seem more practical. Like maybe there was a sandbar, or maybe there was something that could be stood on. But we know the location, that there's no dummy support that's underneath the water that they can't see. And John gives us some detail about where they actually are in the lake. As he had said in chapter 8:19, he says they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. So they really are out in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. This is a supernatural thing happening between Jesus and Peter, showing his authority over the sea. And so kind of looking back, what I mentioned is Matthew bringing this story to us, his readers, him primarily writing to people who have Jewish background and experience, they should be thinking about these key water events that God has done before. The parting of the Red Sea and the Israelites walking through on dry land. When they go in for conquest to move in and they walk across the Jordan River, and the water parts again and the Ark of the Covenant goes through with the priests and they memorialize it. These distinct events should be in their head, but this is more climactic. This is more dramatic. This is more chaotic. it's more confusing. What's going to happen? I mean, is Peter thinking, hey, Jesus and I are going to walk the rest of the way across and you guys can stay in the boat? The water that they're on is the water that Peter's now on, and it is not calm water. We do know that the conditions are so rough that Peter doesn't keep his own focus. He very quickly, it tells us that he is broken in his attention, broken in his focal point, broken in his abiding, broken in his concern, broken in his sense of connection. All these things of his awareness of Jesus and his chaos has shifted. And the thing that is overtaking him, it's like he gives it power again by focusing on it. It was just as real when he was on the water with Jesus as it is when he lets his mind and his attention get consumed by it. And so verse 30, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. So Peter's heart's captivated not by this comfort of Jesus' presence with him, but he's being pulled into a place of fear, being pulled into this place of consumed with his circumstances. He's starting to sink. And so he does the best thing that he could do. The only real hope thing that he does is he calls out, Lord, save me. To call out to be saved. Verse 31, Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? It's very gentle. It's very immediate. And Jesus offers Peter being grasped. He puts Peter in his grip. He doesn't say, hey, Peter, eyes up here. Get your footing again. Come on, it's me, Jesus. Stand yourself back up. Just put your eye. Don't pay attention to the waves. He's not coaching him up. He's not giving him stepping stones to stand on. He reaches out and grabs hold of Peter. This is something Peter cannot do for himself that Jesus is doing for him. Jesus is gentle. He helps Peter where he is. He meets him right in this place where he's had a walking on water moment, and then the next moment he's sinking in the waves. Continuing verse 32. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. Conditions are calm. Conditions are calm. The chaos is over. After 9 hours or so of fighting in the sea, they've gone through enough together, and there's really a beautiful moment that Jesus has with his disciples. They respond to him in a better way than they have before. They do what they should rightly do. Their faith is strengthened. Jesus' identity is clarified. They're not confused anymore. And they know that he is watching over them, caring for them in the midst of all this with him. That as God is, Jonah's declaration is, I'm from the people of the Hebrews. We have the God of the land and the sea. And right now, his disciples know that he is over the land and the sea. They've been saved. His peace is real, and he's seen more fully. There's a sense of where we are and the things that come up in our lives. And the situations are excessive, like the realities of what we experience over a lifetime financially. Whether we're aware of things that we owe, that we didn't want to owe, or we didn't have a better option, bills that need to be paid, homes that have been lost. The things that we have in this life that would mean security to us present an opportunity for chaos. Where we look in our employment, our future employment, our past our job losses, our job struggles, our crummy bosses, or trying to be the boss and take care of the people that are with you. That's like a whole bag of tricks of difficulty. The people that you're working with that you're not sure how you're going to keep working alongside those people, or that project, or the what. I mean, we have a swirl of chaos. The conflicts that we experience in our families, the conflicts that we experience in our families, the conflicts that we experience in our families. We don't get to choose our families. We don't get to choose the conflicts that we experience with our families. We've got some conflicts in our families. Apart from the relationships that we actually would want to pursue and choose, and people, the reciprocated desired relationships, they're messy. Goals and hopes. What do you want for your life? What do you think being fully you and following the course that God has for you? How do you envision the next 5 to 10 years? What's your life map? Our life maps get interrupted. Our goals get frustrated. They get blocked. They get stopped. They get smushed. They get crushed. They become a big mess. And then we have our own wants. The wants that aren't good for us. The wants that are our shortcuts, our nows of how can I get the chaos to not be so loud? How can I quiet the chaos that is around me? How can I distract myself from the chaos that's going on? Because I just want to shut the chaos up. Things that are long-standing and suffering in us. Whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental. Those are the hardest for me to get away from because people don't see those things often. They're just there with you and they go with you. Your own heart and mind is enough besides needing anything else in life. And into all these things, just in the same way that Peter comes to his disciples on the Sea of Galilee, Jesus gives peace in himself. He doesn't need to just silence the chaos. He doesn't need to just give Peter an extra boost of strength or a B12 shot or read a Bible verse. He gives him himself. He welcomes our steps towards him even when they're momentarily full of faith, and then we're right back in the struggle. And the thing that we have in this story is about rescue. It's about being saved. It's about seeing Jesus as the Son of God. It's about him being with people. And it's more than a lake event. It's more than a water rescue event. This is a snapshot of seeing the big, grand story arc of who God is and what he's about for us in life. This is a glimpse of gospel hope. This is a good news story in a bad news situation. Just as Jesus is saving his disciples from their struggle against the wind and the waves and the chaos that's swallowing up Peter and everybody else, Jesus takes hold of the weak, the weary, those who are caught in the enemy's snare, and he lifts them up to a place of safety and security. And he can do this because he is lifted up himself. 1 Peter 2:24, Peter writes of Jesus, he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. So he is lifted up to become a curse for us. And because he is lifted up, he can lift us up out of our misery, out of the grip of Satan, out of death, out of sin. Doing this for a grand purpose, that he would reconcile us to God. Ephesians 2:14 and continuing towards 16. For he himself is our peace, to reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. Jesus sees and knows what oppresses us better than we can see ourselves or know ourselves. He's not surprised. This is a story that has a lot to do with surprise. Surprise at how hard life is. Surprise at seeing something spiritual in the midst of what we think is ordinary. Surprise of rescue. Surprise of the inability of our faith and the need for Jesus to show his power and work his power even when we feel like we're having success, momentary success. This is more than wind and waves. This is Jesus saving because he's the Son of God. Because only he can accomplish what's required of us to break this curse. That only he can take on the fullness of death and everything that Satan could throw at him. And for 3 days, it looked like he lost. Those who followed him were broken up. They were crumbling in their hope. They had their hearts broken. But for all who were in Jesus, we know they endured to the end, not because of the greatness of their faith, but because of the faithfulness and watchfulness of their shepherd. And so the presence of Jesus with his disciples in the midst of chaos as their hope is what I think we really have before us. I don't think that this is a do your next step of have a better strategy, have stronger faith. Receive Jesus and what he has for you and his grip on you. That's the gift that Peter has, is he has the grip of Jesus on him.